am particularly excited today for a number of reasons. One, I always get excited when I get to connect with you on Sunday through online church, sharing God's word, being able to encourage you and inspire you. And I'm also excited about the fact that every given week we have new people joining us for the first time. If you're one of our new people who've joined recently, or this is your first time watching, we want to just celebrate you and say you're so welcome to church today. And it always just excites me to reach and connect with new people. But also I'm excited because today marks a month, 1 month, people, from when we are going to relaunch our in-person gatherings. Yes, come on. Who is excited to get back to in-person gatherings? And of course, as we've said, because language matters, language is important, the church is not reopening because the church never shut down. We never shut down during the pandemic or COVID. COVID can't stop the church. We've been as busy and as fruitful, as productive as ever. However, the part of our church life, a very important part, the in-person Sunday gathering has, of course, not happened for almost a year and a half. It seems so bizarre. And so we're so thrilled and so excited on July 4th to be opening our doors in both locations, Navan and Dublin, for in-person gatherings. So make sure to put it in your diary, friend. We got some really exciting things planned for you and your family, and I cannot wait to see you there. Now, today, of course, we are continuing our series called Follow. And this has been probably one of the best series we've ever done. If you're just jumping in today, we're glad you're here. There's good news. You can go back to our website, lighthousechurch.ie, click on messages, and you can find the last 3 installments of the series. And that's important because this series is sequential, meaning each message builds upon itself, ultimately looking towards our final week, which will be part 6, 2.5, 3 weeks from now. And kind of as a recap, what we did in back 1 is we asked the question, do you follow? And really we're trying to figure out what does it mean to be a Jesus follower. And very often our misconceptions try to disqualify us or discount us from following Jesus. We think, man, I'm a sinner, I can't follow Jesus. Man, I don't even believe in Jesus, I don't want to follow Jesus. Or maybe I don't really dig religion, I'm not a religious person. And what we discovered so far is that being a sinner does not disqualify you. Being an unbeliever does not disqualify you. And of course, this whole thing of following Jesus is not about religion, but relationship. We looked at in week 2, where do we go now? And this idea that our faith, our relationship with God is on purpose, for a purpose. And last week, we asked the question, what are you afraid of? And we discovered that by following Jesus, we can have a fear that we can have a faith, that overcomes fear. I keep doing that. He said the other way around. We can have a faith by following Jesus that overcomes fear. It drives the fear out of our life. The bottom line question we're asking every week is, are you following? The question that God asks you today, even if you're a sinner, even if you don't believe, even if you don't want to be religious, is will you or are you following Jesus? Today now in part 4 then, the message is entitled, what's the cost? What's the cost, right? We all want to know what the cost is. Many of you have signed contracts, where it's house tenancy agreements, where it's job contracts, where it's purchase agreements, maybe it's something you do in work. We're always signing things. And it's important that we pay attention to what we sign because it takes 30 seconds, right, to put our signature in paper, but it can take 30 years to work ourselves out of that if it isn't what we were looking for. Signing things matters. And every contract kind of has 2 parts. It has the fantastic promise on the one hand, and then it has the fine print on the other. And we all love the fantastic promise. And isn't it interesting, come on, that whenever we're signing up to something, when you look at gym memberships, for example, it's the fantastic promise of a sculpted body and a better lifestyle and a better self-image, right? But the fine print is the 3 hours of training every day, the dieting, the discipline. It's like, man, no one sells that part of the agreement. Why? Because that's not the exciting part. We want the fantastic promise. We don't want to pay attention to the fine print. Now, of course, following Jesus isn't a contract. We're talking about a legal thing here, but it is a commitment of the heart. And there is this promise. Don't get me wrong. There are benefits to following Jesus. And hopefully what we're discovering in this series are such benefits, right? But some of these benefits aren't always what we think they are, like we discovered last week. but there's also this kind of fine print. There's always somewhere in this agreement, somewhere in this relation, somewhere in this commitment where there's going to be a cost. And today I want to talk to you upfront and candidly about the cost of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And of course, there's a difference, right, between being a follower and being a consumer. Come on, those who are watching in the Western world, I mean, we are so consumer driven, and so much of our thought process and so much how we judge the world, so much of how we determine our level of satisfaction with something, a product, an experience, comes from how it aligns to our expectation as consumers. But there's a bit of a cultural clash when it comes to the gospel, because the gospel is not a product to be consumed. It's a power that transforms and conforms us into the image and likeness of God's Son. The gospel has power to change lives. And the gospel, the word gospel, simply comes from the Greek word meaning good news. The good news is that by following Jesus, we can experience transformation in our lives. But following him and consuming him are not the same thing. And very often what happens is we fall into the trap of thinking that by consuming him, we're following him, and that they're the same thing. And the truth is they're not. And where the rubber meets the road, friend, for you and for me and for all of us, is when the consumership ends, when the consuming of Christ and whatever products come from following Christ end, when the time to pay a price comes, when the cost comes in, will we still be there? Because here's what I want you to note up front. But by being a follower of Jesus and by being willing to pay the price, not only will we experience all the benefits of following, but we will know whose we are. And we will know who we are. And we can live out what we call, and what's so important to us, our extraordinary purpose. So today we're going to turn to Mark's Gospel. We're going to look at chapter 8. We're going to look at verses 27 to 38. Again, if you want to track along, simply download the Bible app by YouVersion on your phone, Apple, iPhone, or Android. YouVersion app, really cool app, has all these different translations, all sorts of languages. So if you're watching from other parts of the world, we know that from our data that we've got people watching from all over the world. You're so welcome. And so you can download the app in your language. But also in that app is a cool feature where if you click on more in the right hand part, if I'm looking at my phone of the app, and look for events and type in Lighthouse Church Navan or Dublin, depending which location you're closest to, all of today's notes will be there so you can track along with me. So Mark's Gospel, chapter 8, and we're going to dive right into a conversation Jesus was having with his disciples that he was trying to kind of, I suppose, suss out, a good Irish expression, trying to suss out what the general vibe was, what did people really think they were getting themselves into, and kind of like last week, he's about to reveal to them something of the fine print, something of the cost of this thing called following him. So in verse 27, we're told, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around a place called Caesarea Philippi, which was a big city north of the Sea of Galilee, a place that we've mentioned in previous messages. And on the way there, he asked his disciples this very poignant and important question. He said, "Who do people say I am?" So again, at this point, you know, as Jesus invited his disciples to follow him, as he's performed miracles, as he's taught the crowds, as he's gone to village and village and village, Jesus has become quite a popular figure. I mean, come on, how many of us wouldn't love someone who just, you know, shows kindness and mercy, who feeds the hungry, who brings joy to the life of little children, who heals the sick, who's willing to hang out with people that no one else wants to hang out with, who welcomes social outcasts, who welcomes the judged, the criticized, the rejected, the irreligious, the sinful. I mean, who doesn't love a guy like that? I mean, it's hard not to love Jesus. And so there's all this talk around who Jesus is, what he's doing, what he represents, what his mission is, what his message is, and people really fully haven't figured out Jesus, which of course should give us great hope, because that wasn't just the crowds, that wasn't just true of those who were looking from the outside in, that was also true of his followers. Most of Jesus' disciples had no idea who Jesus really was, which shows you don't have to have everything figured out to be a Jesus follower. You stop worrying about the million and one things you don't know and focus on the one thing you do know, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and trust in that and follow him. So he asked the question, you know, what's the word on the street? What's the vibe out there? Who do people think I am? Verse 28, they replied, Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others maybe one of the prophets. And so what the response reveals here, and of course John the Baptist had been beheaded, so he's now dead, is people thought that maybe Jesus was some kind of metaphorical fulfillment of an Old Testament prophecy, that he was like a new Elijah, or a kind of a new prophet, or maybe he was like a resurrected prophet, or maybe he was like John the Baptist, like John didn't really die, like he died but he didn't really die, and now he's alive and preaching again. So there's all these theories and all these opinions, much like there is today in our culture. Who was the historical Jesus? All this chatter about who he could be. But Jesus turns to his disciples specifically. And I think in this question to his disciples, and to this question he poses to his first followers, he also poses to you and I today. He asks the question of you. But what about you? Who do you say I am? What say you? I mean, am I just a good guy? Am I just a good teacher? Am I just a philanthropist, a rabbi, a revolutionary, a theologian, a good Christian? Like when it comes to how you see me, who do you think I am? And of course, there was silence because people didn't really fully know who he was. I mean, this kind of confusion wasn't just a crowd thing. It was also very much a characteristic of his own disciples. But something happens. We're told that Peter answered. He spoke up and he said, "You are the Messiah. You are the Messiah." That word Messiah in the Greek is the word Christ. Some of you thought that Jesus Christ was a surname. It wasn't. Sorry, there's a point. The word Christ is the Greek word, basically translating a Hebrew word, which means Messiah, Savior, sent one, anointed one, probably is the best translation. And basically what Peter is saying was the entire Old Testament spoke of the day when God would intervene in human history by sending his anointed one, his appointed one, his sent one, who would come to the world and make a way for people to come back to God. And Peter basically says in this crazy moment of divine revelation, you are him. You are the one we've been waiting for. You are the Savior of the world, which is like, you can imagine the reaction of the disciples going, ooh, I mean, are we supposed to say that? Is that cool? I mean, is that even right? I mean, are you? I mean, we don't know. There's all this confusion. There's excitement because, hang on, we've been waiting for hundreds of years for this Messiah. And so if you are the Messiah, like, it's about to get crazy, because wait till we tell the people that not only are you some kind of reincarnate John the Baptist or some metaphorical Elijah or one of the other prophets, but you are the one that all these people have been pointing towards. Which is kind of interesting when Jesus in verse 30 turns around and says, don't tell anyone. I mean, like, yes, I am. That's true. I am the Messiah. But don't tell anyone, which of course must have been incredibly confusing for disciples. They're thinking, hang on, I mean, we've just kind of begun to understand that perhaps you are the anointed one sent by God into the world to bring hope and life and light, and everyone should know this, but you're warning us and telling us not to tell anyone? How confusing could that be? And of course, the reason for that was because there was a plan in motion. The world would know. The good news, the gospel would be proclaimed, but Jesus was preparing his disciples. He was preparing his first followers in this moment to not get caught up in the hype and the consumerism and all the benefits of what that might mean, but to focus on the heart of the relationship that he wanted to have with them. So in verse 31, he kind of begins to shift gear here, and he begins to kind of talk more poignantly. He begins to say, well, that may be true, but again, that's the kind of fantastic promise, but there's some fine print here, because if you want to follow me as the Messiah, then there's some things here. So verse 31 says, he began to teach them that the Son of Man, that's an Old Testament messianic term for Jesus. The Son of Man, he says, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. So here we go. Here's a little kind of a harken back to last week's message. It's like, whoa, I mean, is that metaphorical, Jesus? That sounds heavy. Last week you told us that we're going to be beaten and flogged by the same councils, the same priests, the same, religious leaders. And now you're saying that the end game is not just us being arrested, but the fact that you are going to be killed I mean, hang on a second. And we're told in verse 32 that it wasn't metaphorical, it wasn't allegorical, because he spoke plainly to them. And we know he was being literal because what happened next is literally what he said would happen. I mean, he was arrested, he was betrayed, he was beaten, and he was killed. And speaking plainly to them about this, Peter, okay, the same guy who kind of had this amazing revelation, becomes indignant. And we're told he actually took Jesus aside, which don't miss the irony and the comedy of this, because it's kind of like, sometimes when you're around friends or you're out with, visiting someone. Remember we used to be able to do things like that? Like, you're kind of somewhere and then your child's misbehaving, right? And you take them to the side. You know what I'm saying? Experience. Remember what it was like being in school and your teacher would take you aside? I mean, it's like when maybe you're doing something and a police officer or a guard or a security guard takes you to the side. That sense of kind of someone older, someone superior, someone more authority kind of takes you to the side and gives you a good talking to. Well, the irony here is that it's not Jesus taking Peter aside. It's Peter. Peter took, like, I can imagine grabbing Jesus, but Jesus, come over here a second. I want to talk to you. Come over here. And Jesus, and we're told that Peter takes Jesus aside and he begins to rebuke him. Now, rebuke is a kind of a biblical term. It's actually the English word. We don't use it very much in our vernacular. But the rebuke means to give out to, right? To correct, to set straight. I mean, Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to correct him, which is kind of bizarre. And of course, I can imagine why this is happening. The disciples are thinking, Jesus, don't be so negative, man. Don't be so down. I mean, don't rain in our parade. People love us. I mean, you're feeding people, you're healing people. Everywhere we go, there's thousands of people. And it sounds really noble, but the truth is somewhere in that reality is an egotism, is a consumerism, because they're not exactly excited about Jesus' fame and Jesus' ability to draw crowds. They're also excited by what it means for them because they're now famous because Jesus is famous, because they're in the inner circle with the guy. I mean, this is the Messiah's executive team. I mean, it's amazing. So they're thinking, don't be so negative. I mean, don't put a downer on this. I mean, you are the Christ. You won't die. Why? Because that's not good for you. But in reality, what they're saying is that's not good for us. That's not good for me. So what's Jesus' reaction? Well, in verse 33, we're told, the story continues, that when Jesus turned and looked, so Peter kind of pulls him aside, he rebukes Jesus, corrects him, okay, and says, that's not going to happen, you can't die. I mean, that's not how this thing's going to play out. Jesus, we're told, turns, looks at his disciples, and then Jesus does the same thing to Peter that Peter's trying to do to him. It's kind of like, again, as a parent, have you ever had that funny moment where your kids try to correct you? Like, where your kid, it's like, no, hang on a second. There's an order here, okay? There's an order in this house. I'm the parent. You're the child. I correct you. You listen. You don't correct me. One day you'll be a parent and you have children and you can correct your kids, but kids don't correct parents, right? It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't work, right? And so Peter's trying to correct Jesus. Jesus then turns, corrects Peter, rebukes him, as the text says, and then says something really heavy. He says, "Get behind me, Satan." Whoa, time out. What's going on? I thought Jesus was speaking to Peter. He was. And even though he was speaking to the person that is Peter, what we see is that behind the scenes, there was another person manipulating circumstances, trying to pull Jesus off mission, trying to distract Jesus and his disciples from the main goal, and that person, of course, was the devil. And this is very important. Why? Because we have an enemy. I mean, even if you're a non-believer, you're an atheist, and you're not a follower of Jesus, you have to admit that evil is a thing in the world, and it isn't random, and it isn't, compartmentalized. Evil is pervasive. There's just evil in the world. And if you just look at even what happened in our country in the last week or two, I mean, evil is a thing, and it's destructive, and evil seems to be hell-bent on destroying families and marriages and children in particular. It's a thing. And behind that evil isn't some dark mystic force. There's a person, and his name is Satan, okay? And just like in this story 2,000 years ago, Satan was trying to usurp and manipulate circumstances to distract people from the goodness of God. He does it today in the very same way. But Jesus also tells us specifically in what way Satan was trying to manipulate Peter's thoughts. Because Jesus said, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. What is Jesus saying? Jesus saying, Peter, you're acting like a consumer. You're not thinking about the bigger picture here. You're not really concerned for me. You're not really concerned for the world. You're not concerned for the gospel. You're concerned what happens to you and your prestige and your sense of security and your fame and your influence and your popularity if something happens to me. Which is quite interesting, right? Because we see that Peter had this incredible revelation about Jesus and who he was and his true identity as Messiah. But at the same time, Peter's revelation did not change his motivation. His motives to this point still weren't pure. They were still egotistical. They were still consumeristic. They were consumer driven, which shows us, friends, that in the church we can be the same. We can be people, Christians, Christ followers, who have these incredible revelations, these moments with God that transform and change our lives. But our motivation can still be off kilter, off center, can still be out of line with what God wants for us. And the enemy can hijack that motivation and he can manipulate that motivation to bring about destruction. The truth is, Peter was not concerned in reality about what was going to happen to Jesus. But Peter was concerned about what would happen to him if something happened to Jesus. And Jesus spotted it and he called it out because there's a tension here. There's a tension in this text. There's a tension in this message. There's a tension in this series. There's a tension right now in our world. And the tension is this. If our following Jesus is about convenience and ease and when I can get off work and when it's not difficult to bring the kids and when it doesn't cost me something, if our following Jesus is just another consumerist experience, then what Jesus is saying is that's not following me, according to his terms. Because somewhere on the line, there's going to be a cost. It's going to cost us to follow Jesus. Our following isn't predicated on how easy or convenient it is. Our following is built on something else. And Jesus, right now, in verse 34, is about to reveal what that else is. That something else is. For he says, and this is very important because, again, this picture, Peter took him aside. Peter rebukes Jesus. Jesus turns, kind of looks over Peter's shoulder, says, for the benefit of his disciples, right? Hey, get behind me, Satan, because you're basically a consumer, not a follower. And then now he goes to the crowd. So behind the disciples somewhere, there's this crowd of people following him. And now he begins to teach the crowd. He said in verse 34, whoever wants to be my disciple. And the word disciple means follower. Whoever wants to be my disciple. So he says, all of you are here, right? And you're all following me. Peter, you're here. James, you're here. John, you're here. Matthew's here. And all the other disciples, Andrew and so on. And then beyond them, we know you've got Mary Magdalene. You've got these other, ladies who are part of the group. And then you've got this huge crowd of people. And he says, whoever here wants to really be my follower, whoever here really wants to follow me, and wants to kind of accept me and acknowledge me for who I am, Lord, God, Savior of the world, then what's required of you is that you must deny yourself. Now again, deny yourself, what does he mean? Is that some kind of deep theological thing? No. Denying ourselves is something that we do all the time. When you decide that you want to shed a kilo and you go for dinner with your family and friends, remember we used to be able to go have dinner, people, and the dessert menu comes along and they say, what will you have? And you say, I'll have nothing, right? It's because there's a goal somewhere in the future that is of more value to you now, even though it doesn't yet exist. And so you deny yourself in the present, tense, the present situation, in order to achieve something later on. And so we know what it means to deny ourselves. We know what it means to off-put pleasure, to off-put something that we can have now for greater gain later. Jesus said, hey, if you want to really be my disciple, if you really want to be my follower, you got to learn to say no to yourself. You got to learn when it's appropriate and when it's necessary to say no to every pleasure and every opportunity and every consumeristic thing that comes your way. You have to be able to know how to and when to say no to yourself. And he says, not just that, and he says, you must take up your cross. And here's the key phrase, and follow me. In other words, work backwards. You can't follow me if you don't take up your cross, and if you're not willing to say no to yourself. Again, the take up your cross analogy was a very powerful picture, because for us, it's kind of romanticized and popularized the cross. What does it mean? But for a first century here, I mean, I don't want to get into the gruesome details. I know a lot of people are watching with families of what crucifixion was, but the people he's talking to knew the horror of crucifixion. I mean, they would have seen it every day. More than likely, there are people in the crowd who had family members, perhaps, who were crucified. Very often the Romans would crucify people along the road to every entrance to every major city, and they would just leave people hanging there indefinitely. So they were familiar with the picture, they were familiar with the sound, they were familiar with the stench, they were familiar with the humiliation, they were familiar with the degradation. They understood what that meant. To take up your cross and follow Jesus wasn't some small metaphorical, allegorical thing. It was like, man, we got to be willing to go all the way to the end here. But that's the point. That's the standard. Jesus is saying, I'm not looking for fans. I'm not looking for consumers. I am looking for followers who will say no to themselves, who will say yes to the purposes of God and take up their cross and follow me. See, in our culture, what we find is, and this is perhaps true of the church worldwide, and my prayer, my hope for us today as Lighthouse Church, is that what we won't be is a bunch of Christian fans. You know, we cheer for Christ, we wear his jersey, and we can make a game a Sunday. We're there, you know, we even help out when we can financially. But our belief in and commitment to Jesus is built around our convenience. When it suits me, when it's good for me, when it's easy for me, when it costs me nothing, that's when I will follow. But Jesus isn't looking for fans, he's looking for followers. And followers kind of in some ways look like fans. Sometimes they wear the same jersey, they go to the same events, they also, you know, may give financially, they may also serve. But the undergirding motivation is not only when it's convenient, but also when it costs me something, when it hurts, when it's difficult, when it means turning down a job promotion, when it means turning down favor with my colleagues because I know by standing up for my convictions and being vocal about what I believe in, it's going to cost me popularity, by being different amongst my friends in secondary school, by being different on social media, by using different language, having different standards in my relationships, by having different standards on my sexuality, having different standards about, you know, what matters, what's real, what's important, choices, decisions, trajectory. Being a follower means that not only do I believe in and listen to and follow Jesus when it's convenient, but even when it costs me, still I will follow. I will take up that cross, I will say no to myself, and I'll put one foot in front of the other, and I'll keep following Jesus. The question here is about leadership. Who is leading your life? Who has the dominant voice in your life? Is it you and your comfort and your own sense of satisfaction? Or is it God? Is it the Son of God, Jesus, who says, come follow me. I have a plan, I have a purpose, I have a future. I have this adventure. I have this end goal in mind. I want you to have a faith that overcomes fear. I mean, is it the Son of God we're following, or is it ourselves? And Jesus doesn't finish there. I mean, think, wow, that's pretty heavy. What a good place to stop. No. Jesus isn't done yet. In verse 35, it says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Now, question, come on, listen back in here. Question, hands up, how many of you wants to save your life? If you're thinking, well, I'm looking around right now in my kitchen, my living room, wherever you're watching from today, and I'm not really in any danger. I mean, why should I want to save a life? Well, come on, let's be honest. Don't we make choices every day? Don't we? Don't we look both ways when we cross the road? Don't we drive carefully? Don't we eat healthy? Don't we go to checkups when we're called by the doctor? I mean, don't we do all the things that we do because by doing them we're trying to save our life, right? I mean, we're not reckless, right? We don't abuse our body. We don't abuse limits. We don't abuse, things like speed limits and different things. Why? Because we know that by doing that there's a high risk that we may lose our life, and we don't want to lose our life. We want to save our life. We want to cling to our life for life's sake. We don't want to miss out on all the good things this world has to offer us, right? I mean, most of us don't even know how to think about death because we're so uncomfortable with the thought of it that we just push it away into the recesses of our subconscious, and every time it tries to rear its ugly head, we just try to get busy or try to cover up by medicating ourselves or finding some way or some distraction to keep our mind off. Come on, we all, and I'm with you, I'm not condemning you, I'm with you too. I mean, I take my vitamins, I eat well. I mean, I have, heart disease in my family and cancer in my family and, all these things. And every day we got on the road, we're taking our lives. I mean, I'm with you. I want to save. I want to live. I want to get the full measure of whatever this life has for me for as much as I can control, right? We want to save our lives. And that's not a bad thing, okay? Jesus is a good communicator. He's creating common ground. Everyone that day would have said, yes, I want to save my life. But here is the trick. Here's the crux. Here's the point. Here's the kind of turning point in what Jesus is trying to say. The truth is, no matter how hard we work, how many vitamins we take, how many days we go to the gym, I mean, how many hours we sleep, how much effort we put into our health and well-being, no matter how much we take care driving, no matter how much we take care in general, no matter how much hard work we put in to save our lives and carefully, in the end, we lose it. In the end, we lose it. No matter how much hard work we put into staying alive, in the end, my friend, we're going to lose it. Now, Jesus asked the question, do you want to save? We're going, yes. But Jesus said, if you make the focus of your life holding on to life for your own consumeristic purposes, in the end, all the things you've worked for, all the things you've tried to gain and achieve, in the end, you're going to lose it all. The life you are trying to save, is what Jesus is saying, the life you're trying to save, you will lose. But, and there's a but there's another option. You go, how is there another option? I mean, how could there be any other option here? But there is. Jesus tables another option. He says, but if you lose your life for me, if you deny yourself, if you say no, if you take your cross, if you say no to the pleasures and momentary gains of this world, if you lose your life for me, yes, you will lose it. But you lose what you're going to lose anyway. The difference is you lose it with purpose beyond that which you can save. If you lose your life for me, not only will you lose it for losing its sake, but you'll lose it for purpose, and you'll lose it with promise. This is very important. There is promise. There is a promise. There's hope beyond what we see and experience in this world. When you know this, because all of us have this sense, right? Even most people don't believe in God or ascribe to Christian faith. Most of us have this sense that death is not the end. And we believe there's truth in that. But beyond what happens next, Jesus is saying is largely determined by what we do here and now. And Jesus kind of helps to clarify this in verse 36 by going on to say, he says, for what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? In other words, if you spend your whole life working so hard, consumeristically to gain everything you can, only in the end to lose it, and the price that you paid for that was your soul, how is that a good trade-off? Right? Again, the word forfeit means to pay, to give up, to trade in. Literally has this idea of being fined, that you do something, but the penalty for a choice is you're fined. Like a couple weeks ago, I was trying to park my car here in town, and I knew I shouldn't have parked in a place I didn't, and lo and behold, I came back. There was a parking ticket, people. Come on, those of you know the pain of a parking ticket. And I was fined, and the convenience of parking for 7 minutes in a place that I shouldn't have parked wasn't worth the €40 fine I had to pay for the momentary convenience. Jesus saying, hey, listen up, wake up. We're living our lives writing checks that we can't cash. We're living our lives for the 7-minute convenience, but we don't realize that in that decision, in that thought process, in that choice to be consumer, to be convenience driven, what we're giving up is something of greater value or worth. Jesus says in verse 37, what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for something? Come on, you notice, because if I were to say this, if I were to say to you, hey, imagine you have everything in the world, all the stuff, all the prestige, all the power, all the glory. I mean, you have it all. Imagine you have everything the world can offer you for 60, 70, 80 years, right? But then when that time is up and your time here ends, what comes next you have no access to for eternity because you chose the 7-minute convenience. I mean, most of us will go, hang on a second, €40, right, is worth more than 7 minutes. I want to choose eternity with the people I love in the presence of God over 70 or 80 years of convenience and pleasure. Because in the end, there's no exchange, there's no trade-off. You can't buy yourself out. You have to pay the price for the choice you make. And what Jesus is trying to get us to see, my friend, very important, is that my soul is greater than my things. My soul, your soul, the eternal part of you that makes you you, your eternal flame, the eternal spark that makes you whoever you are, your soul is more important, is greater than your things. But the world tries to get us to believe the opposite, that things are more important than our soul. And so what the world does is it gets us to sign contracts with these fantastic promises. But we miss the fine print that what it's going to cost us to have these fantastic promises is we lose our soul. But Jesus wants us to see something. Jesus wants you to see something. That your soul is more valuable than everything in the world. I mean, I don't care what people have. I mean, we saw last week in the news that Conor McGregor, one of our own, is now officially the most wealthiest sports person in the world. And fair play to him and well done to Conor McGregor. But no matter how much stuff he has, and he's got a lot of stuff, let me tell you, okay? Not one part of what he has any greater value than the soul of the least person watching today. In God's eyes, your soul, who you are, your eternal spark is more important than anything this world has to offer. Jesus basically sets us up with this scenario. You can deny yourself now or lose yourself later. You can deny yourself now and say no to me, no to consumerism, no to selling my soul and gain eternity with him. Or you can say yes to everything now, yes to consumerism, yes to your thing, yes to your plan, and later lose yourself. But the challenge is we can't do both. We can't be fan and follower. We can't be consumer and follower. We can't live our lives making choices around our convenience, living a faith that suits us as easy and comfortable, and then gain and reap all the rewards of eternity. There's a choice here. We must choose. Will I forego these things? Will I say no to myself? Will I deny myself, take up my cross and follow him, and in a sense, lose the world, so to speak, but gain eternity? Or will I do the opposite? Jesus finishes in verse 38 with this very, very, very challenging comment. He says, if anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. What Jesus is saying is this, is that if this is challenging to you, if this makes you uncomfortable, if you're afraid to be, associated to me, identify with me, I mean, he's saying it again, in context speaking to that original group, if you're ashamed of being closely associated to me in this world, well then basically we're told that action, that reaction will be reciprocated in heaven. You see, for these first disciples, the message was clear. It might have cost them some of the things they've gained in the world to follow Jesus, but there's a day of reckoning. There's a day, there's a point, there's a climax. History is moving in a direction. History isn't just wandering aimlessly forward. History is moving on a set course to a certain point. And there will be a time, there will be a day that Jesus will come back. He will bring this thing to a conclusion. There will be an end. There will be a closing off point. And the question will be asked of all of us. What did we do with the information we had and with the time, energy, gift, and talents given to us? There will be a reckoning. And the question Jesus is trying to get his disciples, his first disciples in the text to see, and us by virtue of the fact of being his current disciple, see, is that there is a choice that we must make. There is a difference between fan and follower, consumer and follower. We must make that choice, because here's the bottom line, friend. At some point, following Jesus will cost you something. Now, for these first followers, Peter, James, John, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, all these guys, for all these guys and gals, we're told, historically speaking, that all of them died for their faith. They literally, you think about the shock and horror of this story, but after Jesus' death and resurrection, and people like Peter who weren't so sure, after Peter witnessed a risen Christ, he was so convinced in the person of Jesus that he gave up his life. And tradition has it that when he was crucified, he demanded to be crucified upside down, because he said, I am unworthy to be crucified the same way my Lord and Savior was. Every single one of these people who right now were consumers, in it for themselves, not fully believing Jesus, even rebuking Jesus at the thought that he might have to die, every one of them inevitably gave up their lives for their faith. For them, it seemed like a worthwhile trade-off to lose the world but gain their soul. Now, thankfully, most of us, if not all of us, will never have to make that choice. We won't have to die, let's say, for our faith, right? But there may be choices we make where parts of us have to die for our faith. The truth is, by Jesus giving his life, salvation is free. Salvation costs us nothing. And if you're not a follower of Jesus right now, and you want to experience peace and love and a connection with God that transforms your soul, that transforms your mind, if you want that sense of wholeness and healing, you can have that salvation. Right? It's free. There's no cost. There's no dial-in €5 offer. There's no 90-day trial, money back guarantee. Listen, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to believe in Jesus, if you want to be set free, all you have to do is pray and give Jesus your life, and it costs you nothing to believe. Salvation is free. But following Christ, what happens next? The first step is salvation, but the next step after that will eventually cost us something. Whether it's popularity in school with our friends, whether it's promotion in work, whether it's acceptance amongst peers, whether it's the judgment and criticism of our family, it'll eventually cost you something. The good news is that even though we may not have to die for our faith in our day and age, we may have to die for some things for our faith. We may not have to give up our life for our faith, but there may be things in our life that we may be required to give up for our faith. Believing is painless, but following is not. But following has benefit. Following has virtue. Following does something. Why? Because by following Jesus, we can learn to say no to ourselves. Not only for diet purposes or discipline purposes, studying, achieving doctorates or PhDs or master's degrees, or whatever it is we're disciplining ourselves for, but we will be able to discipline ourselves for eternity. And yes, it will be hard. And yes, it will feel like a death as we say no while others go play. But the promise is it will bring life. And by virtue of saying no to yourself and yes to Jesus and trusting his leadership over your life, your faith will grow. Your faith will grow. And you will know whose you are. And you will know who you are. And you will be able to walk in God's extraordinary purpose for your life. What does it benefit or profit a man that he gain the entire world, yet forfeit his soul? Jesus has called us to follow him. Not as fans, not as consumers, but as followers. And the question is, friend, the question the Holy Spirit asks you, whether you're a non-believer, believer, atheist, backslidden person, someone who's been hurt by the church, someone who's been hurt by the world, whether you're 16 in school, whether you're 60 and retired, wherever you are in this spectrum of life, the Holy Spirit speaks to you and he calls you by name. And he asks you, are you following? Will you follow me? Will you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me in this amazing adventure called life? And even though it may feel like you're losing out, and even though it may feel like you're missing out, you will gain so much more. You will be the envy of eternity. Because what is to be gained by following and trusting me, no amount of money, no amount of stuff, nothing this world has to offer even comes close. Jesus tells this crowd, he tells the disciples, tells Peter, hey, I want you to follow me. He tells us to say. Now, it's interesting because when you think about what happened then to all those people who weren't willing to pay the price? What about all the other people who were there? I mentioned some names: Peter, Andrew, John. We all know these people. But what happened to all the ones who weren't willing to pay the price? And the truth is, they don't know. We don't know. I don't know. Why? Because their story, the people who chose to gain the world and lose eternity, we don't even know their names. But those who chose to deny themselves and lose the world, their names are still celebrated today. Jesus is asking us, will we follow him? Next week, join us in part 5 as we ask the question, what should we wear? God bless you guys.